Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 628 with Daniel Scrivner. This was a fun conversation. We went deep into Daniel's career story, which is interesting and has takeaways. So it's a little bit more narrative, a little less prescriptive, but I think you'll love the flavor that we came up with. So you'll learn, 1, how to develop new skills through self-teaching. 2, why Daniel left a dream job at Apple. And 3, why you should always seek discomfort. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP628. That's awesomeatyourjob.com/EP628. Now, here's Daniel's story. Daniel Scrivner is the CEO of Flow. Previously, he was the head of design at Digit and Square. He's worked for some of the most respected brands in the world, including Apple, Nike, Disney, and Target. And nowadays, Daniel advises world-class teams at companies like LendingHome, Empower, TrustToken, Designer Fund, and Notation Capital. He's an early-stage investor in businesses like Superhuman, MixMax, Notion, Good Eggs, Burrow, Madison Reed, Stance, Almanac Brewing, and many more. And he's been invited to speak at some of the world's most prestigious organizations, including Andreessen Horowitz, General Assembly, Techstars, Designer Fund, and 500 startups. Big thanks to Daniel for sharing his wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 5-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. Big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. Now, here's Daniel. Daniel, thanks for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Pete.
Well, I'm excited to dig into this conversation, not the least reason of which, because you have the fanciest microphone a guest has ever brought onto the show. Can you tell us the backstory of why you have such a piece of equipment?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started recording my own podcast a few months ago and was debating in my mind, kind of as everybody does that cares about audio, what sort of a setup to get. The microphone that I use is the Neumann U87. And I don't have a great reason for that. I mean, just the only thing that I would say is in my life, if there's something that I enjoy, I never feel bad about going for quality if I know that I'm going to use it for a really long period of time. And this seems like it fit into that vein.
I hear you. Okay. Well, I love it. So I also love your story. So it's pretty wild in terms of, so you went from a dropout experience all the way to becoming a CEO with some exciting adventures in the middle. Can you please tell us the story of your climb and maybe the most compelling lessons along the way? And we'll have a little back and forth as we do so.
No, sure. And I will try to keep it brief and feel free to jump in anytime. But yeah, I mean, as you alluded to, I definitely have an unconventional background. But what's funny is, it makes a ton of sense to me, obviously, looking in hindsight. But it doesn't, when you said the words "the climb," I don't know why, but I don't feel like it was really that. I guess that just for a little bit of context, a few things that maybe will help kind of make sense of my journey is, one, I've always been a huge believer that if there's anything in life you're excited about, if you care enough about it, if you're curious enough, you can teach yourself how to get good at almost anything. And so that's what I've done. And I started out my career focused on design, specifically kind of web digital design. This was back in the early 2000s. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, so grew up with the internet being a really exciting, cool, new part of my life. And the quick backstory is, growing up, I was never attracted to anything design related. In fact, I hated art classes growing up. I never considered myself a very artistic person. But, so how I kind of stumbled into design, as I think about it, is, I was getting ready to graduate early from high school. This is going way, way back. I ended up taking a course one summer to get some extra credits. I just thought it would be a nice, easy, fun course about how to create HTML websites. And back in that point in time, creating websites now is a lot more complicated. Back then, all you needed to know was HTML. So I learned that class and I just got hooked on that. I suddenly had this skill where I could take an idea in my mind, be able to use HTML to build it. And then I could tell my friends, hey, go and visit this URL, or hey, go and check this out. And they could pull it up. And that just seemed like this magical thing to me. And so the way I stumbled into design was, I started making these websites and thought I was going to be excited to share them with friends, but then nothing ended up looking like something I was proud of. So I just had this moment where I was like, I can make something, but I want it to be cooler. I care about this thing. I want it to be nice. And so that led me to this question of well, what is that? And for me, it still is how I think about design, is I think a lot shaped by that early experience. But my career now, I've been doing design at some level for 15 plus years. I've worked at companies like Apple and Square and with a bunch of other interesting, cool brands. But for me, design is just the intersection of solving really hard technical or business problems and trying to pull it off in a way that you can create something that's singular. So ideally, it's remarkable in that it's unique and interesting, and you're contributing a new note, to the melody. But at the same time, is beautiful, and you're kind of pulling off an artful twist.
Okay. Well, yeah. Why don't we get the broad overview first?
Sure.
And then we'll dig into the details, with one exception. Okay. So design. I'm not great at design, and it's always sort kind of struck me as something. I mean, it's funny. This show's about how to be awesome at your job and skills, learning, and growth and development. So I almost feel contradictory saying this, but it almost strikes me as something you're born with. Like you've got the designer's eye, like you've got the touch, and that's like I don't think I have it. But then I always outsource my design, and
Sure.
I think I know enough to say I don't like that.
Yeah,
and I love that. And
you're a great client.
Well, it's so funny. Like I love designers. I love working with them because I'll tell them exactly. Sometimes I feel crazy about my feedback. Like as I behold that image, that part of it makes me feel like a little kid, and you're patronizing me. And they say, "Oh, thank you. That's great feedback." I was like, "Really?" Because I feel silly saying that out loud, and like you're gonna bite my head off. But the designer's like, "Oh, perfect. I know just where to go based on what you've said." It's like, Great.
No, and I think that's really all designers, I think, are looking for a lot of the times is just specific actionable feedback. As an example, probably the vaguest piece of feedback that I've ever received, and it was while I was at Square, and it was from the CEO, Jack Dorsey, who was looking at a design I did and said something along the lines of like, it's not whimsical enough. And that definitely sent me down a like, oh my God, what does that even mean? What is that? Is it the color? Is it the structure? Is it the, I don't even know. I didn't even know where to go with that.
It's not whimsical. Well, because I think for like corporate design, it's really easy to be too whimsical real fast.
Sure.
It is like, oh no, I don't trust this when I'm looking at it all. This is the spinning helicopter hat.
Yeah, he wanted that dial cranked up, and I was scratching my head for a long time.
So let's start there. So learning design, that seems like a skill that's hard for people to pick up if they don't have some kind of aptitude for it. But it sounds like you disagree. Lay it on me.
Yeah, I definitely disagree. So I think just to take a step back, I have definitely worked with a lot of engineers that have led me to believe that there are certainly some people that probably don't get design, like don't understand colors, just kind of don't understand just aesthetics in general. So I think you have to have some inclination or curiosity or a desire to do a lot of research to just develop a point of view about like what looks good and what doesn't and what is that. And that's something that's very difficult to build up. And if someone were to ask me, how do I figure that out? I would say, I don't know. You need to watch a lot of movies, read a lot of books, look at magazines about architecture and car magazines. And, because I think that's one thing that's always fascinated me about it is great design can work in any industry, whether it's an interior designer using color and shapes and symmetry and patterns and textures to create a beautiful inside of a house, whether it's an architect using some of those same tools to create a beautiful structure. What's interesting about design is kind of, if you boil it down, it is extremely primitive in that it's largely shapes, colors, tones, moods. So I definitely believe that anybody can learn it. And I think, for a little bit of the backstory there, so I've now, like I've mentioned, I've been doing design at some level for 15 plus years. And every single year I continue to get probably, a handful of emails from somebody that saw my work or listened to an interview that I did who writes in and says something along the lines of like, I'm inspired by your story. This is something that I want to do. How do I figure this out? How do I start working as a designer? And, the reply I always write back is probably not the reply they were expecting. In fact, rarely do I ever receive a reply back. But it's just along the lines of like the way I was able to do that. So if someone, kind of understands my story and knows that, okay, I dropped out of college, so I don't have a college degree. I did that because I found this thing that I loved and I didn't want to put that off anymore. But the way that I learned it was extremely basic and, probably is just like hustle applied to trying to learn. But for me, it was very much like, I want to do this thing. So my approach was just, okay, well, I'm going to do free work to start. So I literally got paid nothing when I first started. And I was going to, honestly, anybody I knew or anybody that knew somebody that I knew that wanted something designed, and typically that would be a business card or a logo or a website, and I would just do it for free because I knew that I wanted to be doing it. I needed to have a portfolio so I can get better work, land better clients, eventually start paying. And so I really just worked my way up that way from literally the lowest level on the totem pole of doing free design work for people that I just knew, all the way to working for some of those, some of the largest companies and most respected brands in the world. But it very much was I'm just going to take it one step at a time. And for me, one thing that ties back to, which we can certainly explore, is something that's played a big role in my life is what I call the growth curve. And for me, it's just this sense that I think the way I've been able to get to where I am today is by constantly trying to challenge myself, and I've done that multiple times in my career where I've left really comfortable jobs, not because I wasn't excited about that work anymore. I was still very excited about the work I was doing at those companies, but because I felt like I needed a new challenge. And I still don't know where that comes from, but there's something in me that once I've kind of figured something out, I get a little bit uncomfortable and restless. And so I'm always trying to challenge myself and kind of climb this growth curve.
Oh, right. Well, so there's a lot in there right there in terms of going out and doing it and getting a lot of reps. It sounds like, yes, whether that's doing your own work or observing, other work. And I found that I think it's It is interesting with design in that I think it's taken me a while to get here, but like, and not that I'm a pro by any means, but it really is for me. It's kind of been uncomfortable for a while. It's like I just need to I feel it first, and then I have to articulate it in terms of being in this room feels awesome. I love it here. It's like, why? Well, it but then you start to get a few things, and like I'm thinking like realtors, like when they're taking photographs of places. It's like the top thing is it's free of cluttered garbage.
Yes. It's bright, it's airy, it's typically lots of white, lots of very, very clean white stainless steel.
And there's just not a lot of clutter, and I think that's huge right there, in terms of, and that could apply to a space or to a layout or a website or whatever. Like I think Ollie Gardner, I heard on an Unbounce event, had a slide where someone was like begging, like Oliver Twist, please, one more link shoved into this website. It is like, no, you got to keep it focused. But okay, so by doing a large volume of work and by pushing and challenging yourself and by observing and reflecting, you got really good at the skill. So here we are in the story.
Over a very long period of time.
So now you are great at design and you have made some stuff that looks good. And where does the story go next?
Yeah, so maybe that was the kind of first formative part of my career. And I think for me, there was a moment in time that I still remember really vividly that at the time didn't feel, honestly felt scary. And I don't know if I was optimistic, but I was excited about it. But basically, to share a little bit of the story, so I'm in high school, I take this class, I start doing work for free, literally when I'm in high school, end up graduating 6 months early. A big reason why I did that was I just wanted to do more time doing design work. And I thought, why spend all my day, spend my day in school if I can kind of do more of this work that I really enjoy. So I graduate 6 months early, fast forward a couple of years, and I'm suddenly at the point, I'm in my early 20s at this point in time, probably 21, something like that, say. And I suddenly have this kind of fork in the road experience where I am in college at the time. I'm about to finish my undergraduate degree, getting ready to kind of pick and transfer the university that I want to go to, which, in my mind is kind of my parents' voices. They were always very much, you had to kind of go through this order. And one of those things that was non-negotiable was going to college. So I was like, okay, I know that's what I should do, or that's what felt like what I should do. But the other thing I had in the other hand was I had at this point done enough design work that I actually was getting paid to do it and was really enjoying it and had enough work that I actually had to turn down projects. And so the fork in the road moment was, do I continue with college, kind of go to a university, really focus on that experience for the next 2 years, or do I decide to take a bet on myself? And, at that point in time, the way I was framing it, which is probably a little bit nice, is I'm just going to pause school for 6 months. I ended up quitting the job that I had at the time. So I kind of sever all of those things so I could go all in. And my only goal was, let me see if I can survive, basically doing everything by myself. So I would, pitch clients, I would quote clients, I would give them estimates, I would do the design work, obviously, hand off the designs, do all the kind of clerical stuff and accounting stuff. I just did everything. And those 6 months, I ended up doing that. Initially, my goal was just to make it 6 months. I ended up making it 6 months. And it wasn't pretty. A lot of that was extremely challenging. It was extremely difficult. It wasn't all stuff I was super excited about. Balancing books or collecting invoices or following up on payment is not the most exciting thing in the world compared to design, but I ended up doing that. And what that ultimately led to was, fast forward another year past that, I ended up getting offered a job to go and work for an advertising agency in LA called DDB. That led about a year and a half after that to getting offered a job at Apple to join their marketing communications team, which is when I moved to San Francisco. And I ended up being at Apple for 3.5 years. And I credit that a lot with being if there was any real world boot camp like education experience in my career, it was absolutely being a designer at Apple.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so let's zero in on these particular bridges, leaps, transitions to DDB and to Apple. How do they find you and interview you, etc.? It was just like, your stuff looks good, come on down.
I mean, it's effectively, that's the gist. But the DDB one, to be super honest, I have no clue. I cannot remember if they found me, if I found them. I'd never really heard of the firm before, so that leads me to think
they're huge.
that they probably, they're a big advertising agency, but they're not, they're not like Ogilvy. Like they don't have that kind of brand name recognition necessarily. So that one, I'm not sure. The Apple one is, I think, a little bit more interesting. So the Apple one was, at this point I was, I don't know, mid 20s, probably, 25, something like that, 26. And for sure, obviously, Apple was an incredibly exciting company. And I think for a lot of designers, it's the place you hope you can get to at some point in your career. And so the way that kind of transpired for me is, I have this job at DDB at the time in LA. So I'm commuting to LA and I'm doing all that. And I'm enjoying my work. It's not the most exciting. I'm not doing the most challenging, interesting, modern stuff, but I'm doing it. I'm an actual designer getting paid to do design work, which is crazy. And I end up getting an email from a recruiter at Apple. And, for those that don't know, Apple's definitely one of the companies that they have a large recruiting team, and the recruiting team they really are looking for the best of the best, or people that they feel like can succeed as designers in some department at Apple. And for people that don't know as well, Apple is massive. Even in the marketing communications team, I joined as a marketing designer. I worked on a lot of Apple.com projects and ended up getting to do a lot more interesting stuff kind of in my time there. But Apple also has motion graphics designers, which just do things like animations and transitions and videos. They have graphic designers, which do the packaging and the identities for some of their products. If you look at like AirPods Pro, like that name on the box, that's something that a graphic designer put together letter by letter, playing with the kerning, playing with the weight, trying to get that just right. So Apple has a huge department. So to kind of get back to the story, my first thought, honestly, was this is spam. Like, let me see where this email is from. Let me see if it's actually from apple.com. So I end up looking at it a little bit, kind of look up the name of the person who sent it, and it all checks out. And, the way that worked initially was I was offered an opportunity to come to Apple and cover for a woman who was going on maternity leave for 6 months. And so it wasn't like, here you go, here's a full-time offer. It was, we really like your work. We would like to have you on the team to start. And this is also very common at Apple. About, I would say, probably 50% of the creative team is all contractors. So it's not full-time employees. So they, that's like not uncommon. But I came in on contract and kind of, my approach was I'm going to soak up everything I can, learn everything I can in these 6 months. And I'm also going to try to prove that I have a place on this team, that I can contribute and I can be a good designer and a good kind of member on the team. That's a little bit of that story.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and so recruiter, I'm curious, in both of these instances, did they just not care? Like it doesn't matter in the design world, or for you in particular, like, oh, you don't have a degree? No problem.
So it's really interesting. I would say for both designers and engineers, number one, I think there are a lot of technology companies, it's definitely not a deal breaker. Like I think Google, and I think they've relaxed this policy, but Google's definitely out of the norm in their requirement, which I'm not sure if they have anymore, but they have had for a very long time, is a requirement that you can't, get hired unless you have some sort of a college degree. But typically at technology companies and at startups, it doesn't matter. And the way that I've always thought about it is, I've worked with the majority of designers I've worked with do not have a design degree. And I think that's part of the problem is if you were to try to go get a design degree, you can get one, but it's what is typically called a master's in fine arts. You're going to be doing it for 6 years. You're going to learn all these kind of fundamental skills, which I would argue you could learn just as well on your own by teaching yourself, because it's just literally going and kind of design history, looking up work of famous designers, doing these mock projects. And part of that was the way that I thought about it was, because if we go back to the part of my story where I was deciding whether to go to college or whether to take this kind of 6-month bet on myself, definitely in the back of my mind was like, I can go and study design. But the sense that I had was I was going to be learning fake design. Like, so part of what you do if you go to a Master's of Fine Arts program is it's kind of like going to business school. And you do a bunch of case studies, which are perfectly fine. They definitely help exercise some of your mental muscles of like, here's a problem, how do you figure it out? But does it map to the real world job of being a designer? Absolutely not. The most difficult things involved in kind of being a designer at any level is stuff like, how do you gracefully take feedback that you agree with or don't agree with? How do you ask really great questions of another person's work where you're not, you don't want to offend them. You want to know and respect that they put a lot of work and energy and love into what they're creating, but you want to, try to ask great questions to kind of spur and make sure that it's as good as it can be. And so there are all these skills in design that are largely very powerful, but very soft skills. And the only way you can really learn them is by doing it. And so that was kind of my perspective at the time. And what's been interesting is, I've had the opportunity to work with quite a few people that have a master's in fine arts degree. And I don't say this out of disrespect for any of those people. It takes obviously a huge amount of hard work to go and get a master's in fine arts degree. But did I think they were necessarily better day in, day out designers? No. And I think typically they would have kind of a chip on their shoulder a little bit of, well, this project's too good for me. And I think part of what helped me was there was no project that was too good or not good enough for me. Like I was excited to work on it and take it on if it was a design challenge. And I also just loved it. And I think that there's this kind of sense of enthusiasm and love that, I don't know, maybe I didn't get it beat out of me or in college, but it's lucky that way.
Well, and that's a great perspective. When you're at Apple, it's like, okay, I'm going to learn as much as possible in this place. And in so doing, your skills are sharpened. And so what happens next?
So I end up, at the end of those 6 months, I got offered a full-time position and I joined the Apple marketing, they called it, I don't know what it's called anymore, but they called it Marcom internally, which was short for marketing communications. But basically at the end of the day, it's like everything that's not an ad on TV, that team did. So I ended up getting offered a full-time position. Fast forward a little bit, I about 3 years later, I found myself in a position, I found myself in a few times now, where when I first got offered the opportunity to join Apple, I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is the place I've wanted to be. I can't wait to be on this team. And 3.5 years later, again, really like for me, I think a word that sums up a lot of how I approach the things that I love, which is both good and bad, but I think largely good, is obsessive. And so for me with design, I just obsessed over it. I would think about it all the time. I would constantly be working on little projects to try to improve my skills. So like one of the things that I would always do when I was at Apple, I think this is great advice for anybody that has a job where it's like, you're going to get better the more you do it. And if you challenge yourself with things that are slightly out of your comfort zone, you're going to show up to work just a better all-around employee. But I would do things like, when I first joined, I knew how to put together a layout. And a layout, you can sometimes describe that as like if you go to, apple.com. A layout is what generally does this page look like? How do you chunk it out? What's the typography there? Where are kind of the images? It seems very similar to doing product design if you're doing a layout for a screen. So I could do that, but I sucked at doing icons. And icons are this thing that they're like, if you go, and you open up your iPhone if you have one, or Android phone if you don't, you look at app, kind of the app icons or the little kind of graphics or symbols that you click on to get around an app. That's icon design. And it's both a very ancient form of communication. It's based on like hieroglyphs and cave paintings. And there's a lot of those things that map almost literally one-to-one for kind of icons that we have today. So it's a very old form of kind of communication, but I was really bad at it. And so one of the things I would do is just challenge myself to like, I'm going to make an icon set of 30 icons I'm excited about. And it's the way these projects always go is they are absolutely brutal in that for 80% of the time, I'm just like, oh God, I'm not getting any better. What's going on here? And I just keep chugging through and try to put one foot in front of the other again and again and again. And inevitably what happens is if I can just persist long enough, I'll finally get to a place where it all snaps into place. So I would do stuff like that. But about 3.5 years in, I just had this moment where I felt like I knew how to be successful at Apple. And what I mean by that, and hopefully it doesn't sound egotistical, but in my mind, if you kind of take a step back and think at a place like Apple, they have a very recognizable aesthetic. Well, what does that mean? That means that there are rules that inform it and that there's kind of like a construct and a framework for how they think about it. So if you can understand those things and get good at those, you can take on almost any project and figure out in time how to execute it in an Apple way. And so I'd kind of gotten to that point, and I had this moment where, again, I did this kind of flash forward, saw myself at Apple 10 years in the future, and thought that that would have been perfectly fine. And there are still times when I think back and wish that maybe I had stayed a little bit longer just because there were such incredible people there and I learned so much and just enjoyed working with them. But I felt like that probably wasn't the best thing for me. And part of what inspired me in that was I alluded to earlier, Apple has a lot of contract designers. And typically those contract designers, they don't work at one company for longer than 6 months. And one thing I observed that I thought was really interesting and different about the best of these contract designers were that when they were teed up a problem, they could look at it from 10 different angles. And so they could say, okay, I know, as an example, say something like, take an example that came out today. So Apple announced these AirPod Max like headsets that you put on your head that literally are like headphones. And, so you would get teed up a project like, hey, here's this thing we're going to launch soon. Figure out how to tell this story on a marketing website. And you need to think that through. But what I found fascinating about the people who had kind of a broad body of experience was they could look at it from a bunch of different angles. They could do a dark version of that layout, a light version of that layout. They could do something that felt super like pop culture-y. They could do something that felt really minimal and restrained. And I thought that there was something really special there. And so, the kind of story I put together in my mind was, okay, well, I think part of that is they just get to flex different muscles. They're constantly taking on different challenges. And so what that led me to think about was rather than stay at Apple, which would have been perfectly fine, and would have been a great outcome. But rather than doing that, I think it's time for me to challenge myself. And so what I ended up doing, which was not at all common at the time, was leaving Apple, which when I was there, no one left Apple. You didn't leave Apple to go work somewhere else, especially as a designer. And you definitely didn't go to a startup. But I decided that I wanted to go and join Square. And Square at that time was about 50 people in size. It was in San Francisco. It was right in the city. I didn't have to commute. So that's when I made that leap.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, I'm going to push fast forward a little bit. So you went to Square, you did some great things, and now you're the CEO of Flow. How did that come to be, and what is Flow?
Great question. So, I'm trying to figure out how to back into this question. So, if we go back a little bit in my story to kind of when I was really young, one of the things I talked about was just this belief that you could, if you were interested in something, that you could figure out how to do that. And I give a tremendous amount of credit to my parents. And, so growing up, we would do things like, it was very common, probably happened once a month, where we would all get in the car, drive down to the biggest library nearby, spend hours and hours in the library. And so one of the things I got, I have two younger brothers. We would literally all five of us, we had a 5-person family. We would split out, all go to different levels, find the books that we were interested in, and we would spend hours there. And at that point in time, we were, kind of young, say 10, 11, 12 kind of age. And so one thing I got fascinated, just hooked on, that I was just, you can't really still put my finger on it and say why, was business and investing. And, so in high school, I was reading books like The Millionaire Next Door or Rich Dad Poor Dad, or I can't even think of other ones, but like, largely business and investing books that typically people aren't interested in, let alone in high school. I've just always been fascinated by that. And that's something that still today, it's another obsession I have, is I just love learning from investors. Why? Because I think they're experts at kind of thinking through industries and companies and which company has the kind of best odds of success and why. And I'm also really fascinated with entrepreneurs and the idea of creating something of value that you end up charging more for than it takes to create, which still to me feels like kind of pulling off a magic trick, that someone's willing to pay for that, even though it costs less to make it. That generates profit, then you can invest that in other things. So I have these interests. So, fast forward and end up leaving Square after 5.5 years. At that point, the company had IPO'd. We were 1,500, probably 2,000 plus people at that time. Had an incredible experience. But, for anyone that doesn't know, being at a company that goes from 50 people to 1,500 or 2,000, and from, having a little bit of venture capital money all the way to IPO in 5 years, it is a brutal experience. It's wonderful in so many ways, but it is also an incredibly trying and difficult experience. So I got to the end of that, was super proud of what I had done when I was at Square, and of the team that I was able to work with and helped build. But I knew again that I wanted to flex some different muscles. And so what I did leaving Square was I started kind of exploring things that were entrepreneur-like and investor-like. So I started doing some venture capital investing, some seed investing in companies. I now have a portfolio of over 100 that I've built up, and I've learned a lot from that. I also started advising companies. One thing in San Francisco this may be changing today. San Francisco is changing quite a bit at the moment with the coronavirus and just all the effects that city is feeling. But at the time that I was there, it's just packed with people that are like really good at what they do, that have really interesting ideas. And so what that means is there are a lot of startups that, don't get design, but need design to be successful. And so I started working with some of those to help them think about how to think about design on their side. Fast forward a few more years, and I ended up, so Flow is owned by a company in Canada called Tiny. And Tiny is like a mini conglomerate. You can kind of think of it like a mini Berkshire Hathaway. And I knew one of those founders, Andrew Wilkinson, for about 10 years. And this was, going back, it's like very serendipitous, but going back to being a designer early on, it's a really small, community. So we kept in touch and kind of, he was a designer, I was a designer. We would both kind of check out each other's work and loosely stay in touch. Long story short, fast forward a bunch of years in the future, and he now has this company that has many sub companies. Flow is one of them. And so for a little context about what Flow is, Flow at this point in time, it's a 10-year-old company. We focus on task and project management software, largely for teams. And the way we excel, the way we kind of compete is by offering people a beautifully made product that is powerful, but it doesn't feel bloated and it feels like something you're excited to work in. And the metaphor I use there a lot of times is like a WeWork office versus a cubicle. And if you think about productivity software, a lot of productivity software is the cubicle land, and we try to create this beautifully crafted, piece of software that teams need. So we went to grab coffee. Flow at that point in time was not doing super well, and they felt like they wanted somebody to come in and take over, and someone ideally with design background that could kind of invest a ton in the product, create a vision for the product of where it was going to go from there. And so I joined Flow 2 years ago, and over the last 2 years have been working on turning around that company.
All right. Well, what a beautiful tale from making websites to you are heading up a company and are investing in as businesses that are really cool. By the way, I use Superhuman for my email and I love it.
I'm glad to hear it.
So, wow. So what a journey. I mean, I'm drawing my own little lessons about really digging deep and then challenging yourself and learning from the people around you and keeping those relationships alive. But since we're actually already towards our final minutes here, why don't you boil it down for us in terms of what do you think are the top do's and don'ts for professionals looking to grow a career and advance in hey, more fun wins meaning and money, as we say here. If you want more of that over the long arc of your career from age 20 to age 60, 70, top do's and don'ts, lay it on us.
I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for an hour, so I'll try to be as concise as possible, just because I think there's so many. Like, one thing I think you learn over time by working in a lot of different companies, by being at different stages of your life at different companies, it's a very nuanced thing. So I will share, I think, what's helped me, and people can decide whether that's useful. But I think the big things for me is, ideally you're doing something that meets that bar of obsession. Like in my mind, I've got a 2-year-old now. We've got another one coming on the way right around Christmas. And with my kids, I think the focus there is very much like, I just want them to find something that is energy giving and life sustaining. And I think if you can do that, then you have this, it's almost like a nuclear fusion reactor where you have something that is just never going to run out of juice. And the goal in my mind initially was I wanted to find a couple of things. And at this point in time, that's design, business, and investing that I can think about, obsess about, read about, and try to get better at over the long course of my life. And so find those things and then pour yourself into them. And what I mean by that is, I highly encourage people. And again, life's a single player game, so you have to decide if this is applicable for you. But for me, something that's always been really helpful is if you find that thing that you love, then pour yourself into it. And what that means is not only giving 100% at work, but ideally also doing stuff outside of work that challenges yourself and develops muscles that are probably related to what you do at work, but might help prepare you for your next job, might help prepare you for the job you want in 5 years or 10 years or what you want to be doing. And, when I think back to my time at Apple, and I would work a full 10, 12-hour day, get on the bus, do this fun little icon project. I didn't do it every day. There was definitely days I was burnt out or I just needed to shut off my brain. But I've always had stuff like that going on the side. And I think, people have different opinions about that. In my mind, I do the things that I love. And so what that means is there's very little distinction between work and play or work and real life. And so I think that blurriness is really helpful. And then I think another thing that I would suggest is to challenge yourself. Like something that I have distinctly found is, that the majority of people I've worked with are kind of limit their own trajectory by the belief they're willing to have in themselves, the confidence they're willing to have that they can overcome any hurdle, and just this deep sense that if they're interested enough in something, if they want something bad enough, they can figure it out and they can do it. And this isn't anything in the world you can have go for it type, kind of pep rally or speech. It's just, I think the way to kind of think about it is this very soft, just in the background confidence of if there's a challenge that you see in front of you, believe in yourself, bet on yourself, and know that if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you can find a way to push through discomfort, that there are really good things on the other side of that. And then the other thing I would say is, really throw yourself into that growth curve. And, I almost try to visualize it in my mind of, I always want to be in a place where I'm pretty uncomfortable. Ideally, if I'm in a job or doing something and I'm committed to it, I'm really excited about it, I want it to be slightly out of my comfort zone. And I think, this role that I've taken on with Flow is certainly that. The role I took on early on at Square was certainly that. When I was at Apple, it was certainly that. And I think if you string together kind of subsequent experiences that step by step by step challenge you a little bit more, get you a little bit out of your comfort zone, make you do things that you don't feel like you're qualified for or you don't think you can really do yet. I think the trick there is like a lot of people have this idea that I'll do that once I can do it. And if that's the way you think about it, you're never going to do it. You just have to start doing, be willing to be bad at it, be willing to be uncomfortable, be willing to kind of cringe even at the quality of your work initially, because that's the price you have to pay in order to get better.
Well said. Thank you. Well, now could you share with us a favorite book, something that you really dig?
Yeah. The book I was thinking about kind of before this interview that I think might be really applicable, maybe people haven't heard of, that I really enjoy is a book called Principles by Ray Dalio. And for a little bit of background there, Ray is the founder of a hedge fund called Bridgewater. It's the largest in the world. They have a very different culture where they really try to go all in on this idea of meritocracy, which is that there's not really any hierarchy. It's just kind of a group of peers and anybody is as good as anybody else. And it's all about kind of the arguments you can make and the work you're able to do. And so that book is the output of the last 30 plus years of trying to build this company. And it really is what's in the title. It's a handful of principles that apply to working in groups and working as an individual. And I'll stop there. I won't spoil it, but it's a thick book. I highly recommend you get the hardcover just so you can open it up and flip through it. You do not need to read it from cover to cover, but it is an incredible book.
And a favorite habit?
So something I've been thinking a lot about, and this falls into the vein of like, I'm not good at this yet, but I see the value in it and I want to double down on it, is taking time to reflect each week. And this is something that I think if I were to go back in time, this idea of reflection and what does that even mean? Where you're kind of pausing, you're not doing any work, you're going to stop sprinting, you're going to stop focusing on your to-do list, you're going to stop caring about your email, you're just going to stop. Ideally, go somewhere where you can kind of think by yourself and sit down and just really reflect on how things are going at the moment. Like what is, and for me, I try to do that once a week for at least an hour. I have somewhat of a structure. I have a few questions I ask myself every single time. Some of those are really simple things, but these are, at the end of the day, really profound questions. Like, are there opportunities that are around me or I have access to or I see that maybe I just haven't recognized? And especially in my role now, that's true all the time. Another one is, are there risks I haven't recognized? How are things going? What's going well and what's not? But I think taking time to reflect, the kind of metaphor I would have with that is, I think reflection is something that almost none of us do often enough. The reason it's important is because anytime in your life that you have a goal, you need to be able to know how you're tracking and course correct. And what I found in my own life is I would reflect, once a year, maybe by doing New Year's resolutions or once a month or, once every 6 months. And that's okay. But I think if you can get that down to where you're spending a little bit of time, it can even be 20 minutes or 15 minutes once a week. What it allows you to do is just tighten up and keep you on track with where you're headed. So I would say reflection is big.
Mm-hmm. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch with you, where'd you point them?
They can visit my website to see the podcast episodes I record, to see the stuff that I write at danielscrivner.com. Can also follow me on Twitter at @DanielScrivner. And they can learn a little bit more about my podcast if they're interested at outliers.fm and about Flow at getflow.com.
Daniel, this has been such a treat. I wish you lots of luck with Flow and your challenges and all you're up to.
Thank you so much, Pete. It's been awesome.
I love what Daniel had to say here with regard to challenging yourself and taking on those little side projects and just understanding that at first you're going to be really bad and lame at them, and that's okay. That's part of the game. And I like the challenge you made with regard to those icons. It was very specific and kind of meaty in size, such that it's something you could feel great about when you finish it off. And it's going to take some time. It's going to keep you occupied and learning through a season, whether that's a month or a quarter or a year. And and gave you something to refer back to, which I find is great when you're learning, is that you're doing something over a period of time, and then other experiences in the course of life and stuff you read and learn and hear and people you interact with just help reinforce that and add new layers as you iterate on the thing. So I think that's pretty cool to have a side learning project that will boost you. Maybe it's learning Python or some sort of coding thing, or maybe it's a particular skill associated with social skills or oratory or whatever. If you have a specific project, it's going to take a while, and you can know when you're done, and then you feel awesomely victorious when you've accomplished it. I think that's a good move. So thanks, Daniel, for that. If you're finding yourself not challenged, you can make your own challenge and keep on moving. Again, the show notes, the transcript, the links to items we've referenced are at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP/628. And I look forward to catching you next time. Peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.